Welcome to This Week in Coworking, where industry leaders get succinct, actionable insights. Here are your hosts, Hector Colones and Mike LaRosa.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of This Week in Coworking. Once again, my name is Mike LaRosa, and I'm joined by Hector Colones, and we're here for your weekly recap for week 16 of 2025. Hector, how are you doing? I think we're both getting settled in post moves. I'm a little bit farther ahead than you are, but hopefully not a sea of boxes anymore for you.
Yeah, so most of the rooms are not boxed up, but there's still a few boxes, including wherever my microphone is. So hopefully everyone can still hear me, and post-production will make me sound as crisp as ever, but things are still missing in this house.
Yes, I was about to say, you're not doing your editor any favors.
Perhaps.
We might need to get you that microphone sooner rather than later, but we'll get all that audio synced up. And speaking of syncing, this week's sponsor is Syncaroo. Hector, would you like to give us a little lowdown on what Syncaroo is? Maybe you might know a little bit about it.
Absolutely. So folks, it was really interesting. The last week was obviously at a conference, and folks were like, oh, you're that newsletter guy. Why are you talking about syncing? My actual day job is one of the co-founders at Syncaroo. And we really believe that your best people should never be blocked by disconnected technology. So instead of us telling you about what we do and how we do it in the newsletter this week, we've shared 3 different examples. One from a nationwide IT director who talked about why they chose Syncaroo. Another from an industry pro who was actually in our session last week at Juicy. And the third from an indie operator with growing ambitions who share what it felt like being able to bring Syncaroo in to help with their operations. But I'm not going to bore you with it. Click on the 3 links in the newsletter, dive in, have a look. And if you have any questions, reach out. We're currently doing a free one-on-one for anyone who signs up for some more information in the next couple of weeks.
Yes, if there's anything that we're learning about 2025, it is the power of integrations and tech stacks and AI and chatbots. And I think another story of a smart phone booth now, new systems and whatnot. So I think syncing is most definitely super important. Yeah, I would say that syncing is starting to hit mass adoption, which leads us to this week's first story that we're going to recap. There's a lot in this week's newsletter. So, as
Right.
always, if you're a listener and not also a subscriber or a reader, make sure you check out the newsletter. There's a ton more than we're going to be able to tackle tonight. Or should I say today, depends on when you're listening to it. But this was an interesting piece that came from the CEO of WorkPad. He shared it on his LinkedIn profile. And I think a lot of folks in this industry always hear about a hockey stick type increase in the market and demand. And there's some of us that have been doing this long enough to feel like that hockey stick is never gonna come. And so there is a theory that's out there talking about early adopters, and then how do you get to mass adoption and post adoption and whatnot. This individual believes that we've crossed the chasm and we've gone from early majority or early adopters to early majority. And that's based on 2 data sets that we've got here, that UK flexible workspace inquiries have risen 14% year on year and are now 206% higher than pre-pandemic levels. That's according to Savills. And that they also saw additional research published by Savills Flex Division Work there, talking about inquiries for larger requirements, 20 plus desks, have doubled in the past year. So I believe that we are very much on that path towards that big 30% of the market by 2030. What say you, Hector?
I'm a big fan of this graph, given the fact that I've always been forward looking with the technology and the companies that I kind of work on. We're always trying to target the innovators, right? That first 2.5% that are really going to be the tastemakers who I adopt stuff. So seeing this applied on the entire industry. I'm a firm believer that co-working is a subscription business and therefore should be treated as such. And all subscription businesses have that chasm, right? You need to get those first innovators, bring in those early adopters, slowly start attracting that early majority until you get that late majority. And that's when you have a mass market. That's where we have that full appeal where everybody uses flex space in some way, in part of their week, in part of their month. And that's, I think, where we're shifting towards. So I love this piece. I love the way that it's framed, but I'm also a firm believer who's absolutely preaching to the choir here. I think we're still better, like in the early adopter phase. I think mass majority out there are still thinking of co-working in very interesting terms. I think we'll have another piece coming up a little bit later, just talking about how some people still think of co-working as like this very cliquey collective of like specific types of people. And that has to be broken down a little bit more for it to become into that early majority, into that late majority.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating to see what market adoption has looked like. And for sure, I think everyone would agree that COVID expedited that, but maybe in different capacities. I'm a firm believer that the hot desk really was a flash in the pan thanks to COVID. And it's led to a lot of these private offices or private suites or meeting rooms. And I don't think there's a single company out there that hasn't used Flex in one way, shape, or form. Whether they have a formal policy, a formal program, whether they pay subscriptions for aggregators for their employees, or just if a random salesperson wants to swipe their credit card for a phone booth or a meeting room. Companies have used it in one way, shape, or form. And I think it's interesting that not only are companies adopting it in all capacities, but real estate developers are as well, not just in a diversification of their portfolio, but sometimes in a repositioning.
Sure.
And so we've got a story that came out of the Philippines that Regis has been on a real tear lately. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of new locations. I think that they've probably up to some other stuff. We'll see in a couple weeks or not whether or not that inclination is true. But for sure, one thing they did do was convert a former supermarket in the Philippines into a Regis. So it's exciting to see, like I said, companies, not just the occupiers embracing flex, but also landlords of all shapes or sizes that are just figuring out how to monetize a building, whether it be from selling groceries to now selling meeting rooms and private offices.
Yeah, I mean, it is really interesting because we definitely have seen this surge, especially in places like the UK and across the US, the popping up of co-working on either the main street or the town center or town square. And in kind of the retail establishment, we've seen it open up in shopping malls, we've seen it open up in kind of these big retail places. But switching over from like a grocery store into a co-working space, I think this is one of the first I've seen, or at least that has been publicized in that way. A very interesting play, but yeah, it's going to see a lot of different types of landlords starting to think, oh, yeah, I can bring this in. I can license this. I could bring in my flex space, and it probably is going to be a better business. Maybe it might be a better business than a grocery store. We don't know yet. We'll have to see how it plays out.
And depending, I'm not familiar with this part of the Philippines. If it is a grocery store, if there's chances that it possibly has shopping, if it was out in a suburban market, I'd say that there's probably some great opportunities in other places in the world, like North America, that's got plenty of some vacant retail with shopping close to where people live. Co-working follows very closely with like foot traffic as it relates to real estate thought processes. And a grocery store typically is in a place where people can easily get to it, or there is probably ish foot traffic, either because they're using that as the anchor or it's part of a larger development. So it wouldn't be surprising to see if co-working also found a role as a anchor type tenant, right? Or some type of known entity or kind of consistent presence in real estate
Yeah,
portfolios
definitely.
and developments.
I also think it's really interesting because this week I've had these two conversations around a kind of Amazon Go type grocery store and how it's a matter of time before that and co-working collide. And you have a workspace, but also a pick up and drop off. Like you don't have to go and tap your card. You just pick up the stuff and it automatically builds your card. And then you sit down at a desk and that automatically builds your card. And then all these things just magically connect. But I was also just thinking there's a lot of places in America where we need more grocery stores than we do co-working spaces. So hoping that it's not too much of a tide, because there are absolute food deserts across some states where there isn't any fresh food or good grocery stores. So maybe this combined effort brings both to those two communities.
Yep. And I think oftentimes there's urban areas, or I should say, co-working in urban areas where co-working kind of fills. It might not be a food desert per se, but it might be a area that's not properly supported with community centers or different types of resources. So co-working can fill all different types of gaps. And I think that leads us to the next piece, which was an op-ed. It's not often we include op-eds. Usually we try to stick with news, but Hector, why don't you tee this one up? Because I think you're the one that found it and flagged it for me at first.
Yes, absolutely. I noticed it could also go flagged by a few folks who are in my network who will also fumate at this take on co-working. But before I dive into it, I want to really take what I took out of it, and that's the fact that just because we all know about the benefits, if you're listening to this, you probably know or are the leader of the benefits of co-working. But there's also, going back to what we were saying about the work pile in that graph, there's a lot of work graph. There's a lot of people who don't know that great co-working spaces exist, or community-focused spaces exist, or affordable spaces exist. And so this piece is by a young lady called Emily Watkins. She writes mostly talking about how cafes are starting to kick remote workers or laptop warriors out, and how they, as patrons of these shops, can adjust the way they work to fit better into these cafe cultures. But what a lot of people took point with or took pain from was that at one point she mentioned that, yes, I know there are co-working spaces. I'm aware there are co-working spaces, but they are A, full of awful people, and B, I can't afford one. Two things that I'm like, there are awful people everywhere, Mike. We were discussing this before, and some of them may be in a co-working space, but there's also co-working spaces that are filled with amazing people. And there are so many different types of co-working spaces. And talking about the price point, there's also different types of pricing. There are affordable co-working spaces. There are subsidized co-working spaces. There are also co-working spaces that do run free open days and monthly co-working days and things like that. So it's just really interesting to see this antagonism to a sector that we are all drinking the metaphorical Kool-Aid. But we have to remember that there are folks who maybe had a terrible experience or terrible experiences that we can still somehow reintroduce to the different types of co-working. So I don't know where exactly in London M&A is, but I'm inviting all co-working spaces in London who do believe you have the right community, reach out and see your community is a better fit for Emily, because I would love to hear her thoughts on the different types of co-working. And maybe there are some that are not filled with awful, terrible people.
Yeah, I like you said, we were chatting before recording. There are awful, terrible people everywhere, and that's just an unfortunate part of life. But I have to say that I have run into more great people, more wonderful people in co-working spaces than I have run into horrible people. The whole cafe culture is very interesting. I think that I've run into long time ago people that didn't want to go to co-working space, that wanted to be in a cafe that had a particular feel. I've also been to cafes that embrace the folks that come with laptops to work, but also set boundaries as to what time they can do so at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock. The laptops all have to close, and it does change the vibe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they want it to be a little bit more social. I think I very much agree with what you're saying, is that anyone that I've met that doesn't like co-working just hasn't found the space for them, which is a fairly Pollyanna take on it, kind of hopelessly optimistic take on it. But it's very true, because there's been plenty of co-working spaces that I haven't liked. And I'm not afraid to say it. It just wasn't my vibe, or it just seemed like different people that I wasn't gelling with, or wasn't in the right part of town, or was just too far to get away to get there, or maybe at the time it was too expensive. I find now that there are so many aggregators. There's a new one that popped up on my radar this week that I had never heard of. And I was like, we had another one yet again. So I don't think that price is any longer unless they're just being incredibly cheap. And on that point, I don't blame some of these cafe owners. Owning and running these types of businesses is incredibly difficult and the margins are incredibly small. So it is challenging if you've got someone who's sitting there nursing a $4 coffee for 6 hours. Like it is difficult. So I think I think everyone's got their own opinions.
It does remind me of one concept that I saw, I think initially in Germany and then came across the UK, called Zifferblatt, where you didn't pay a membership. You didn't pay for cake, you didn't pay for coffee, but you paid for every minute that you were inside the cafe.
Yep.
And it was just a really interesting concept, trying to flip it all on its head and being like, if you're going to sit for a couple of hours, that's fine. Have as much coffee as you want, have as much cake as you want, use the Wi-Fi, but maybe you pay for the time instead. And I think that's a lot of the arguments I've seen around this post is coffee shop's not free either. If you add up those lattes, if you add up those croissants, you then have to step out for lunch and get another coffee when you come back from lunch. It quickly adds up, especially since many co-working spaces now offer premium coffee as well. They offer that level of, maybe not barista level. I have been to co-working spaces where they have got free baristas, but yeah, maybe it's not the same level of coffee, but the same kind of quality of beer at least.
Yeah, no, I love the pay per minute or pay per hour, pay per length of time model, whether it be just straight up co-working space like Cove used to do way back in the day, a few pivots ago before they changed their business. It was pay by the minute. You scan in, you scan out like your Amazon Go store. But I got it. It wouldn't be a podcast episode without me referencing travel. What you just described sounds a lot to me like an airport lounge, right? Whether it's a membership or a day pass, you can sit there, you can get a buffet. They're not charging you by the croissant or by the pastry or by the cup of soda. You got Wi-Fi, you got somewhere to sit. So I think it's an interesting take. But yeah, but I think you've got a good point. I think Bernie needs to gather some of the co-working folks in London and bombard this individual with free co-working so that I can just imagine you're going to co-work and you're going to like it, right? And so it's a mission until we get this individual to find the space that she likes. But it is all about vibe. And speaking about vibe, the next story in this weekly recap for week 16 is a great piece comparing Equinox and the model of gyms, or like how you brand and market a gym as a premium strategy compared to workspace operators. So I've been a member of Equinox. I've enjoyed the experience, even though I'm sure I had empathy when everyone was upset when they changed those soaps. I know everyone lost their mind, which is part of the problem of having this premium strategy, right? Because when your customer, but anyway, I digress. The whole background of the post was it's not just what you think you're selling. You're not selling an elliptical, you're not selling dumbbell, you're selling a vibe, you're selling a community, you're selling kind of an experience. And how do you categorize that? And Equinox has done a really good job turning it into a lifestyle brand. They've got restaurants, they've got different types of gyms, they scooped up Soul Cycle, that's part of their kind of umbrella. They've got hotels now. And I think that we're starting to see that with co-working. We know for a fact that IWG has a wide variety of different brands. Bast has got a wide variety of different brands. 25 and in Chicago just rolled out a new brand that they're managing. So I think it was a really thoughtful piece, and I'm sure the owner operator out there would enjoy reading it. It might be a little bit pricey to pull off of a strategy, but it totally tracks with everything that we see in day life. The only difference between a Courtyard by Marriott and a Ritz-Carlton by Marriott is the thread count and maybe the room service menu. But other than that, you're just sleeping in a bed.
Yep. It's very true. I love this focus on creating premium brands. As going back to the previous story, there are more and more affordable economy, accessible, low options. but they're also becoming a more premium side of the industry. And it's only a matter of time before folks go from that premium offering into auxiliary services, into secondary travel perks, all that kind of stuff. But I do the fact that Paul also references something that we're also seeing a lot of, this emergence of the opco, propco model. A lot of operators are realizing that they're really good at the management and running and the hospitality side of it. And landlords are realizing that they own the properties that are great for all these things, and they're working together to create this model of one company manages the building, one company manages or runs the brand, the aesthetics of the feeling, and how they become a propco opco model where they work hand in hand to do this at scale. Piece, I'm really glad that it got into the newsletter this week. It's a very nice look at the other side, or another way to look at where we may be going at some parts of the market. And it's a really good one to dig into and geek out about.
Yeah, if you're a frequent listener, you know that this is not a new topic that we're coming across, right? And yeah, sure, we curate this newsletter, but there's only so much news we can not pay. And these stories just keep on popping up over and over again, right? It's the different types of brands, how you differentiate yourself, because what's the difference between a meeting room across the street from each other than either the scent of the building or the added amenities or whatnot? It really is fascinating to see how rapidly this industry is evolving. And with all that excitement and all the growth and all the numbers that we were talking about earlier, it is still an industry that experiences businesses that close. Hector, you've had a co-working space that closed. I've run a co-working space that's closed. And while at the time it really felt like the end of the world as I knew it, looking back now, it was just the end of a chapter. And just like other businesses like hotels or restaurants, not all of them stay open forever. Some of them close for a wide variety of different reasons. And we shared a really thoughtful post that I thought most operators would get something out of, because you've either had to shut down one of your locations, maybe you had to trim which ones weren't performing well, or maybe you've had to shut them down entirely, but you're still involved in the industry. The owner of the Coop out in Vegas, Dana, who started out as a commercial real estate broker and saw where kind of the industry was going, shared that after a full decade that she was closing down the space. And it's not that it failed, but it was that her life has a new chapter, right? And so it might not include running a co-working space. There's a lot of folks that like doing it because they like to do it, not because they're trying to make a ton of money out of it. And there's some that are very successful at it commercially. And at the end of the day, people can only do what they can do. And just wanted to give her a shout out and commend her for running a space for a decade, because that's a lot longer than a lot of us can say. Wish her the best of luck. And I thought it was a really nice take from her perspective, and something that owners and operators would appreciate, even if they are trying to decide whether or not to continue. Things are wild and crazy, and the industry feels like there's a collective nervousness. And I think it shows that there is life after co-working if you decide that it's time to move on.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, huge commendation to Dana and team. A decade of running a co-working space. I interacted with them online. I set pies there for a pie day one year. Loved everything that they were doing, but also I love the fact that it takes courage and strength. This is no longer for me. I have to take another direction, have to make that choice. The community will go on and do its own thing. And I know that there's a lot of operators who are sitting on that line right now. The world is a very turbulent place right now. And just know that whatever decision you make for you and yours, we're still rooting for you. We're rooting for your community. You do what you need to do to look after yourself and yours. And yes, I know, again, it feels very overwhelming sometimes. We celebrate and we share a lot of good news, big numbers, growth. But we see you with your operators. We see you with your community. We see you putting in that time and making the tough calls, regardless of whether that means keeping pushing through or closing up. We see you, we appreciate you. And this newsletter is for folks like you to hopefully give a little bit of inspiration, a little bit of idea, a little bit of insight into what other people are doing. And that may include taking a pause, taking a step out, and just doing something that is good for you and yours.
Yeah, it just dawned on me because we do have another announcement for a decade-long space, Hera Hub DC. Shout out to Julia. They announced an extension of their space, but through a partnership. It's crazy to think that we've been doing this long, Hector. But then also being mindful of real estate leases are typically what, 5, 7, or 10 years long. 2015, 2016 was like the WeWork boom days.
And
So it really is interesting to look back and see how many spaces are still open. What type of status are they? What type of shape have they taken? And which ones are no longer with us or which ones have evolved on? I think that there's another space in a smaller town. I had been talking to the operator. They've closed down the space, but they're not closing down the community, something that's very a la like Indie Hall did. So yeah, you never know where your co-working journey will take you. But more than likely, it's always going to involve some type of people and some type of community.
yeah, and if you have closed and you land up doing something else, or you're thinking of doing something else, please let us know. We'd love to share your insights. It is a community of community leaders, whether you run a co-working space or not. I haven't run a co-working space in almost a decade now. So, whatever you do, wherever you go, we're still going to be here rooting you on, rooting on your community, and sharing your news, whether it's in or around co-working.
That's another weekly recap, just in under the 30-minute mark. I think we did pretty good there, Hector. Anything we got coming up the next week or so, or any other conversations you might be having that you want folks to keep an eye out for?
Yes, we've got quite a few podcasts lined up, so definitely make sure you subscribe, click that button, press the button, whatever it is that people say, like YouTube things. Do that. But we've also got the next edition of Undercurrents coming out in just over a week from now, digging really deep into AI agents, what the hell they are, what they aren't, what they're for, what does the future look like. And I'm going to be very honest, it's probably going to age like milk. Listen to it as soon as it comes out. So at least at that point, for about 5 minutes, it'll be relevant and useful.
Yeah, I love that analogy. Thanks again for an awesome conversation. Always enjoy geeking out on co-working with my co-host, partner in crime. And until next week, adios.
Bye.